Hello, everyone. I'm Monica, the Creative Beast, and I want to thank you for tuning into my channel today. I thought I would make a little follow-up video regarding an element of a book that I shared the other day, my Open Secret book, where I utilized some techniques that I learned about the grief recovery method when I trained to become a grief recovery specialist. So the grief recovery method is a really great educational tool to learn about the misconceptions we are taught in our culture and society about grieving, how to unlearn all of that, how to move forward with compassion, what forgiveness is, and how we can grieve the loss that has happened in our lives, whether it is death of a loved one, the ending of a relationship, or another loss. There is a list of like over 40 losses that happen in a person's life, and we're not really properly grieving hardly any of them. So I will put a link down below so you can look up the grief recovery method on your own in case you would like to look for a specialist in your area. But I wanted to mention a few points about the grief recovery method. And that is, well, it's a really great technique. And I will say that when I trained to become a specialist, we all go through the process. And we also have a couple of extra bonus lessons to help us realize that as human beings, we really connect faster than you might imagine. And as a result, we can feel the loss of even little things that you may not be aware of because we connect so quickly. We learn about what compassion is. We learn about forgiveness. We learn to take 1% responsibility for our feelings, and this is a big one. We teach how to take personal responsibility about our feelings, which also helps us process loss and our feelings around loss. The method covers some very specific elements to help with healing. We discuss the entirety of the relationship, and we use a relationship graph where we start from the beginning of the relationship. Even if with your parents, it's from the moment of your birth and you may not necessarily be conscious of those first early years. We start from the date that the relationship began, and we end it on the date that the relationship ended. Now, whether that ending is by death, breakup, or divorce, or some other break, that is the timeline of the graph. We cover the highlights of the relationship and the low points. And even though you may think it's a relationship of all low points, there will be some moments of high points that you will need to uncover. We start with the graph after discussing all the elements of misconceptions about grief. One misconception I'll share with you right now is that in our society, we have this misconception that we can replace the loss. And I would say the best example of that would be, say, as a child, you had a pet dog and you loved that dog, and something happened and the dog died. And in order to gloss over the feelings, your parents probably came with a new puppy a couple days later, thinking that you can replace the loss of the original dog. But we really can't replace a loss. So that's a misconception that we have in our society, and it plays out in a lot of different ways. We gloss over the feelings. We try to replace the loss with a number of behaviors that can range from drinking and drugs to binge watching TV to what people consider retail therapy, excessive shopping. And none of these things work because after a while, you're still going to start feeling those feelings. And the only way to deal with them is to process them and work through them to the other side. So that's an element of misconception about grief that we teach and educate people who are ready to work through the process of grief in their life. Another important element is the letter. So in my book, Open Secret, I shared some relationship graphs. I briefly shared letters. And the letters are very specific in format. They cover 3 areas. They are very specific for a reason. You know, some people will talk about writing a letter to somebody, and the thing is, if you just start blathering on, it doesn't necessarily get to the heart of the matter. You may find some great illuminations writing freestyle that way, but we speak mostly to the graph of the relationship, some common themes that come up in the graph, and we address some of those elements. So there are 3 elements. We do forgiveness, we make apologies, and this is where taking responsibility for even 1% of our feelings comes into play. And we make significant emotional statements, which could be either positive or not so positive in nature. The statement is essentially making a statement of something that you feel the other person needs to know, even if that person is no longer with us. So we work with a grief recovery specialist so they can be a witness to the relationship graph. We write the letter and we speak this letter out vocally to the specialist, who listens quietly, unconditionally, without judgment. And this is perhaps one of the most healing aspects of the grief recovery method, is that we have a witness to what has happened, someone who does not interrupt us with questions, which can often be thinly disguised judgment. And we are fully witnessed and heard. We are allowed to have whatever feelings come up in the process of reciting the letter, so that we can clear the feelings out and move through them to the other side. And often people will feel great relief. If there are still some elements that don't feel complete, then sometimes an extra addendum letter might be needed as you uncover some other elements of the relationship. We use the phrase complete the relationship because closure implies a sort of closing a door on a relationship. We don't really close a door. We're still here. So in some ways, we're still dealing with our end of the relationship. And that is why we complete the relationship through the graph and through the letter. So another misconception that I want to share about grief is that we are not meant to grieve alone. That's not who we are as human beings. That's not how we heal with grief. We do not heal in solitude. We heal in community with support from people who care about us. And that can also be a grief recovery specialist. So those are just some basic elements about the grief recovery method that I wanted to share, as they were mentioned in my art book, Open Secret. It's a really wonderful process. I have done this process a couple of times with people I was in a relationship with that I thought would be great friendships or partnerships. And then they turned out not to be. So I went through the process, and even though I have yet to work with a specialist to go through the graph, explain the graph, and recite my letter, just doing the process alone has been a great unburdening of my own feelings of anger, resentment, rage, upset, disappointment. It's a very, very helpful process because it's not about getting scattered. It's not about a lot of verbal, emotional vomiting, as people call it. While some of that may take place throughout the process, the graph gets to the heart of the matter. It shows us patterns that we may not necessarily have seen, so we can take responsibility for not having seen them before, and we can reconcile these patterns. We write the letter so that we can apologize for our share of what took place. We forgive the other person, and we make the significant emotional statements to complete the cycle of the relationship. So I will leave a link for you to the homepage of the Grief Recovery Method. They have books. You can certainly purchase a book if there isn't one at your local library. Support your local library. But you can buy the book and attempt to work through the process yourself, but it is always advised to work with a specialist or at least a very trusted friend who would be willing to be your silent witness, who will listen to you go through your graph and listen to you recite your letter. So you can buy the book and work through it on your own, but you can go to the website and look for a specialist in your area. There are many trained specialists around the country and some of them in other parts of the globe. Many of them are licensed therapists, so there's also that. But I say the Grief Recovery Method is a really, really powerful tool for releasing pain and trauma that you may have suffered at the hands of people you've been in relationship with. So those are my few words about the Grief Recovery Method. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you will take a minute to look at the Grief Recovery Method site. There's also a blog where you can learn more besides the book and hear some people's personal stories of how the Grief Recovery Method really helped them. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you find this helpful, and I'll be back soon with some more creative, artsy books, among other things. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.